don't have access to my kitchen today, but it's St. Patrick's Day and I want to make a beef stew with stout. Generally, Guinness stout would be used, but I didn't want anything quite that heavy. So I found in the World Market this chocolate stout. And since chocolate is a part of the recipe, I figured I'd just be a little daring and go out and try it. So what do I have here? The original recipe, which is not mine, called for 3 pounds of beef. Well, I'm only going to make half of the recipe. And if the camera's shaking, it's because I'm hand holding it. I have 1.5 pounds of beef cubes, which I have actually soaked overnight in buttermilk. I also have salt and pepper. I have 2 tablespoons of oil. I'm going to be using avocado oil. 1.5 garlic cloves will be chopped. A tablespoon of tomato paste. A teaspoon of brown sugar. A 1/2 teaspoon of cocoa powder. A 1/2 teaspoon of onion powder. 1 1/4 cups of the chocolate stout. 1.5 cups of broth. I'm going to use chicken broth. 1 teaspoon of thyme. I'm using dried thyme. A 1/2 pound of turnips and carrots. A 1/2 teaspoon of balsamic vinegar. A 1/2 teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce. A 1/2 teaspoon of lemon juice. 6 tablespoons of sour cream. And 1.5 tablespoons of horseradish. Now, because I am hand holding, I won't be able to show my steps by steps, but I will do individual stills and I'll videotape when I can. So let's get to it. At this point, I have my oil heating and I have seasoned my beef cubes with salt and pepper, and I've also covered them with a tablespoon of flour. What I'm going to do now is brown them. My oven is also preheating to 325. I'm using a convection setting. So I'm just going to let this brown, and after the meat is browned, I'll add in the next set of ingredients. At this point, I have browned the meat. I'm going to add in the cocoa, the fennel, tomato paste, onion powder. Stir this up until it's fragrant, and then I'm going to add in the broth and the remainder of the flour. At this point, I've added in everything, including the beer and the broth. I've turned the heat up to high, and I'm just going to let this boil until it thickens. My sauce has started to thicken. I added a little arrowroot to it to help it thicken up, and I placed that wooden spoon over it because the beer, the ingredients were threatening to run over. I've added the thyme to the beef. I've placed the meat seasoned with the thyme into the thickened broth, and I'm adding in the root vegetables. I'm using turnips and carrots. My oven has been preheating at 325. I'm just going to cover this up now and let it cook for 2.5 hours. At this point, my stew has cooked for just under 2.5 hours. I added in the Worcestershire sauce and the balsamic vinegar, and I also added in the lemon juice. Additionally, I added in chicken broth because my liquid had basically cooked out, and I flavored it with just a little more lemon juice. The recipe suggested that if you thought it needed a little more salt, add a little more lemon juice. Tasted it, tastes delicious. My St. Patty's Day meal is complete. I have a side of mashed cauliflower. I have the stout stew, and I also have a stout cake that I made so I could use up the excess stout beer. Everything is delicious. I'm looking forward to this meal. This cake is so delicious. I didn't do a video. I will in the future, so stay tuned. Bon appetit.